All right, greetings, Earthlings. Welcome back to our next episode of the Galactic Visitor Center. Today, I am extremely honored. We have such an accomplished guest. We have Cheryl Costa, who, as many of you know, is a two-time U.S. vet, combat vet, published author, columnist, witchcraft, proud transgendered woman, and I am just so happy to have you on the show. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, yeah.
Coming.
Thank you, Marcellus.
Yeah. So what we always ask our guests, just leading off, is, to just talk about your background, how you got into this whole world. I know you have a very deep story on this, and so we'd just love to hear how you got into this world, and we can take it from there.
I think the easiest thing to say, and I'm going to keep it short since we only have an hour. I did when I was 12. We were coming down from an uncle's farm in late August, a couple of weeks before school started, and my mother had my father stop the car. We were in a little dirt road in the middle of a cornfield, and she points out into the western sky and on a cloud in the sky, and parked out there like a rock. And if you look at your little fingernail, arm's length, that's how big it was. It was a big silver sphere. And my mother had my father shut the car off for a minute. And she says, it could be something NASA's doing. NASA was relatively new in 65, right? Could be something the Air Force doing, could be a weather balloon. And then she looked at me and she says, it might be people from another world. Well, we got a good conversation going. And then we got the car going again, got down to the bottom of the hill, turned left towards hometown. And I got that Chevy Impala had those big windows in the back in those days, right? And I got up in there, who are you guys? Who are you guys? I'm thinking to myself, right? When that thing decided to leave, I didn't see an effect like this again until like the early 90s with one of the Star Trek movies. Boom, that kind of thing, and that changes you.
Yeah, and, I would say so.
And so, when you're a teenager, mom and dad are stupid, So, but my mom and I got a conversation going at that point. And she'd get books at the bookstore. I'd get books from the library. I was a boy person in those days. Hey, we pick up a couple of Odyssey magazine or something like that in the barbershop. Hey, mom, look at this story, take it over to the drugstore, have them Xerox it for you, And so I was really into it. In fact, when Von Daniken's book came out, I was in high school, like a junior or senior in high school, and she dog-eared on the top, I dog-eared on the bottom, destroyed the book.
Yeah.
But I was well read. And I remember the day my mother got a letter from this organization in Illinois, starting this organization called the Mutual UFO Network. Okay. And it was a little mimeograph letter, And so, but when I got in the Air Force in 1970, they had this list of 150 organizations you couldn't be in if you're going to have a security clearance. And MUFON was one of them. So I kind of had to keep my hands. Didn't mean I didn't read things over the years, but I just kept a low profile with it. And then same thing as I went through my military career. I did see a UFO when I was in Vietnam. Christmas Eve, 1971. Me and a friend of mine were walking down to, neither one of us were Catholics anymore, but we were going down to midnight mass for something to do, right? And there was this thing streaking across the sky, and then it stops. And I looked at him and I said, jets don't stop and helicopters don't fly that fast, and that kind of thing. And then I said, if that's what I think it is, it's going to start dancing around like a fairy. Darn if it start doing that and it gone, and neither one of us had our minds at midnight mass when we got there, but
sure.
So I kind of followed it, read it. It was really good. In 1990, I had been on a business trip. I had to be hospitalized while I was on it down on business. I was in the hospital 10 days. Okay, I had to have surgery. And when I got back, I had packed up my apartment. Okay, because I was going to move into a new place. And I had been on this business trip for a couple of months. It was one of these long-term, it stayed at one of those stay hotels, stay, you know what I'm talking about, that long-term stay places.
Yeah.
And I was out there for a couple of months. And when I came back, I didn't have any place to go. My whole apartment was packed up in storage. And a friend of mine, I called him up. I asked him if he had a place I could crash. And he says, "Oh, come on. My dad's getting chemo right now. Come over, get the keys, feed the cat for me. You can stay in my house as long as you like." I get into his house. He's got first editions. This is 1991 time frame. And he's got first editions of all the best UFO books published probably since 65.
Oh, wow.
Everything that Stanton Friedman had written at that point, right? So since he didn't have cable, I had a lot of stuff to read at night, and I was there like 6 months, till I could get another apartment. And so I sort of went to school for 6 months on UFOs and the woo, and then went on to other things. But I couldn't really come out of the closet about UFOs because I was under the strictures of a clearance throughout my 32 years in aerospace industry. Because I had a high clearance.
Right.
So, with the work I did. And so they retired me in 2011. And I wasn't ready to quit yet. So I went to work for a newspaper, and I came from the technical trade. So I was able to easily get a position doing that. And one night I saw a sidebar story. We had just started the 700-ton Swiss press running the morning edition. All we had to do was wait for 2 hours for that to go, and then we can all go home. 3 o'clock in the morning. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we're sitting there. It was November 5th, 2012.
Oh, recent. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was sitting there, and we just got the press going. I got on my computer. We could go over and look at the outside web. And I called up CNN, see if anything else was going on CNN.com. And there was this little sidebar story. Okay. UFOs have been declining since the 1980s. Maybe they were always just an urban legend.
Ooh.
And I looked at that and I said, "Oh, that has got to be misinformation." So I didn't know. So I went out, I fished around. MUFON was restricted. You had to be a member. But I found this place, National UFO Reporting Center. So I went out there to them, first time in my life. Okay. Get out to New Fork, and I get down in a couple of pages, and I found some year-end totals buried down in there. So I took 1985 up to 2012, right? And I plugged them into a spreadsheet, and it went up like a rocket. I'm going, what memo didn't the UFOs get? So, it was like a parabolic curve. And
Right.
said, wow. So what happened was a couple of nights later, again, once the press got going, we just sat back and, sipped soda or something like that till the thing was done, provided there wasn't a, crash on the paper rolls or something. But I started looking at some of these reports people had. And I guess to some degree, I had bought into the notion, it's all kooks, nuts, and crackpots. Okay.
Yeah, that's been the message for so long, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I start reading these things. Some of the reports were simply, "Wow, we were out on the backyard, we saw something cool," and that's about it. There were other ones though that had some narrative to them. Okay, well thought out essay, and they would put out and they explain what it was and everything. And I got, wow. I was finally finishing a 40-year-old bachelor's degree, right? And I'm doing it in entertainment writing.
Oh, wow.
So I pulled some of these stories off and started punching them up a little bit, not making them fictional. Here's the problem. When you do newspaper stuff, it's who, what, when, where, why.
Right.
If I could tell you why and could prove it, I'd be getting a Pulitzer and a Nobel Prize.
Right.
Okay. And I can't tell you who because the service has blocked that. We don't want to out anybody, right? But I could tell you what, when, and where. So if you were to read one of my old columns, weekly columns, that says Bob and Susie were laying on the hood of a 67 Buick. It wasn't a 67 Buick. It wasn't a Buick, and it wasn't Bob and Susie. Okay. All right.
You added some color to it.
You had to make it readable. Okay. But I didn't do it I didn't write these articles in a sensational way. So 6 editors laughed me out of the office, chased me out of the office, had security escort me to the door out of the office kind of thing. And then a guy I knew I had worked with at the newspaper I did work for said, come on over, let's talk. Well, he sat there and talked with me over a cup of coffee first, and he says, we're about the same age, so we read all the same stuff, Frank Edwards and the early Stanton Friedman, all this kind of stuff. So he says, look, I'm sympathetic, but I'm the editor-in-chief, and I can't write that kind of a column. I'll try you out for a month.
Mm-hmm.
Calls me up at the end of about 4 weeks. I'd given him 5 articles. He says, get over here. We need to talk. And I'm going, all right. He had that Dread Pirate Roberts thing, almost like to kill you in the morning kind of tone to his voice, right? So I'm late to the meeting. Get the car parking lot's torn up. I finally get a place to park. I come into the meeting. He's got all the columnists around this big board table, and he's sitting there talking to him. He stops and he looks at me and says, there's our rock star. I'm going, what are you talking about? He says, you're on the, I pitched myself for the online edition only.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I knew they didn't have column space in a newspaper is driven by advertising, and I knew they didn't have the column space to give me a column.
Right.
So I asked for the online edition. They were trying to develop that too. And he says, you've been here. She's been here 4 weeks, and she's pulling more page views than all the columnists combined.
Wow. Wow.
Okay. He says, just keep doing it. And about 6 months later, the digital editor, who was my interface, I was never an employee. I was a hired freelance. I was a contractor. Okay. Which fit good because my entire military industrial contract career was I was a contractor, right? You know, okay, this plays into it. So he calls me up 6 months later, digital editor, who's my direct contact. He says, we can measure this at the server. You're pulling a national audience, hon. I said, just keep doing it. Get to the Christmas party at the end of the first year with this stuff. And him and the publisher get up there and says, Cheryl's the only columnist here pulling an international audience.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And the trick we did,
clicks.
It clicked, you know?
Yeah.
So the deal was, and New York State was my beat, but I did write other kinds of stories. And I treated the topic matter, and this is what we got a lot of mail on. I treated it with respect. I didn't sensationalize it. My story about a UFO sighting or a sighting report or an abduction or something like this was just like the burglary across town, the fire down the street, the car wreck 2 blocks over. Just another story. And people liked that very matter of fact thing. And digging into it over a couple of years, I had to have something to write about. People say, hey, Cheryl, wow, writing a newspaper column, that must be fun. And I said, it's a 1,000-word term paper every Thursday. You know, that usually shuts everybody down when I tell them that. And so the bottom line was I had to start researching on the things. And, you know, occasionally I'd get to Wednesday and I'd write about this week, you know, and my wife Linda's very, smart librarian person, right? And scientist. So she says, well, you haven't looked at this or you haven't looked at that. Have you thought about this? You know, and it would usually get me going and on some tangent, and I'd write an article about it. And then I started adding up county information. Now, here's the goofy thing. In New York State, I'd look at a major city, because in those days, I believe, like everybody else did, it was all driven by large population areas.
Right.
I have since proved that wrong, but back then I was like everybody else. And so what happened was we started doing this, and then I realized MUFON had county data, but it was wrong most of the time because it was dependent upon the person who had the sighting knowing what county they were in. Okay. And later we would find out 3.5% of people who reported UFOs didn't even enter the name of the city they were in. And then we found out later 7% didn't spell the name of the city right. Or they spelled it right. And they said, Portland, Oregon, next to Joe's Bar. You know, you can't sort on a thing like that in a computer.
Right.
Okay. So in MUFON, not MUFON, but National UFO Reporting Center, I wrote them a nice letter and I said, look, do you guys have some way to turn on the county data on what you're putting on the web? They said, we don't collect that. You know, if you want to know what county, just stick a pin in the map. That was their answer to me.
Wow.
And
That's
in the 21st century, as they say. So Linda and I sat down and looked at this and said, okay, fine. Let's just start analyzing the data. Okay. And it was one night in, October of 2015. We're sitting in our pub with a couple of pints waiting for our burgers. And there's this, and Linda's looking at me, says, look at all this cool stuff we found, because we showed it to retired state directors from MUFON and state investigators. And they say, we didn't know there was a cluster there. We didn't know there was a cluster there either. How did you find that cluster? And we weren't doing case studies. We were doing larger numbers, collecting data. So Linda said, if we pull the data from both databases, we'll be doing like Google. We'll be doing big data.
Right.
So I had the analysis background for both my old school intelligence gathering skills mixed with new modern computer tools. Okay.
Right.
I had those skills. Plus I was an analyst in Lockheed for most of my career, except for 5 years I was producing industrial films for them. I went to film school and they figured that out. Said, hey, could you make movies for us cheap? Yeah.
Were you doing like workplace safety videos?
We did aerospace training films for the people who were actually building the modules, and that went into space shuttle computers and stuff like this. I also did workplace safety. I did fire safety, soldering safety, chemical safety. We did a few public relations films, that kind of thing. So I did like 70 titles in 5 years. And it fried me. It really did.
A lot.
And that's when another division of the company had gotten a contract, and they needed people with submarine electronics background. Had that. So they transferred me to Virginia, and I went to work down there, and I was helping run a field service reporting center. When that red phone rang, it was usually an admiral or somebody on his staff saying, our submarine is someplace, and it's over in La Maddalena, Italy. Put somebody on a plane to come fix this sonar thing. Okay. And that's what I did for quite a while. And it was about the same time I was changing from what's his name to Cheryl.
So like tech support for subs.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. There was a couple of times the only way we could get them there fast enough, because the ship had mission requirements. We had to stick a couple of guys on a SST once with parts and equipment.
Oh, wow.
I'm over there on SST. I had such a relationship with the United Airlines freight office. They gave me a United Airlines hat at one point. It was weird. There were a couple of times the shipyard up in Groton, Connecticut, New London, Connecticut.
My grandfather worked there.
Yeah, great place.
He was a steam fitter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there were a couple of times we had people up there who were helping factory consulting with the people who were installing it in the systems there at the shipyard. And there were a couple of times they needed something in a worst way. And there had been a terrorist bombing of an airline. I think it was that old TWA 800 that, we had problems with that fell in the ocean outside of DC. They say the conspiracy theory says it was shot down by the Navy. Who knows? But the bottom line is, after that happened, you couldn't put a package on that you were not accompanying. There were many an afternoon. I would take a box over. I had to buy a seat for me and a seat for the box. We'd strap it into the seat, and I would fly to Groton, Connecticut, stay overnight, and come back.
Oh, wow.
Okay. That happened more times than you can shake a stick at, and it was an interesting period of my time. And then about that time, the IT people realized I was a little bit of a technical wizard with computers in those days, right down to the code level. And the IT people figured out they were coming to me more than I was going to them for consulting. So I got drafted into the IT organization. I did everything from desktop support, first level, second level, third level, fourth level desktop support, evolved into virus control. That was interesting, virus control. And it got to the point where in my last 5 years there, I knew where all the bodies were buried with the hackers. Okay.
Sure.
And scared the snot out of corporate management one day. I couldn't get my management to take the bad news up to the boss. So I did something, figured my career was over by doing it, but I made an appointment with the chief financial officer and the chief legal officer. And I sat down and I gave them a 30-minute PowerPoint presentation, and they were both shaking when I got done. And the first 2 slides in the PowerPoint before we got into the technical aspect was a dictionary definition of fiduciary responsibility and a definition of liability. And I was pointing the finger at the board of directors of the company through the CFO and the chief legal counsel. And suddenly, within about 3 weeks, boy, I'll tell you, a couple of heads were rolling. They put me on a plane to Florida to the main offices of the IT division. And I gave a presentation there to about 90 people. And they said, we're not going to sit through 90 slides. And I said, okay, fine. Just sit through the first 10. I got through the first 10, and these 2 women managers looked at me and said, we're going to have to go to the mall this afternoon and get our hair colored. You just turned us gray. So everybody sat through my slides and everything. So after I did all that, it got a whole movement to start cleaning up the act of the IT organization. And I was offered an opportunity to go out and work on one of the defense contracts, and I got out of Dodge.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that all speaks to, I think, your skill set of looking at the statistics and being able to deep dive on the data. Like if you get your hands on, some sort of array of data, you're more likely to be able to do something with it than the average person. So,
oh God, yes.
So that's interesting that now you've been able to spin that into essentially publishing these kind of statistical looks at where the hotspots are, right? And that's does it all feed back to that?
Well, sort of. Okay. What Linda and I decided to do on that October evening was everybody was doing nothing but case studies. And if you read anything about UFOs out there, it was always it's like the advertisement for an FM radio station. The best UFO crashes from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right. and stories are still like that. They glorify that period of time. In fact, when our white book came out, the first book we came out with in 2017, everybody said to us, why didn't you go back 40 years? Because there's this perception that was the golden age of UFOs. And the reality was the amount of UFOs was an average of 250 to 500 a year from 1960 to 2000. Okay. It totaled 15,156. Okay. I've got
that whole span of time.
In that whole span of time. Now,
you could also argue it was this number because that's only the people who report it.
Well, yeah. Well, that's a different issue. Okay. But the bottom line was it was 15,156. Well, if that was the golden age, and we are in the platinum and diamond age now, because I've got that many in 2011, 2012, and 2013 individual years that are that much. Okay. So 2001 to 2020, 167,632 reported sightings between the 2 national databases. I'll say that number again for your audience. 167,632. What we determined statistically is only 1 in 257 people report what they see.
That's what I'm trying to get at. So
basically, in the UFO community was always 1 in 10 reports what they see. No, we blew it out of the water with real data.
Wow.
And that's basically what I was trying to get to, is that most people are kind of just staying mum when they have this kind of experience.
Well, that number came. I wasn't even able to work with that number until about 2017. 2017, Fox Pictures was releasing a horror film that they did. They set it against the Phoenix Lights. Okay, was a backdrop story to what was going on, and some teenagers got abducted, that kind of thing. Okay, in their poll, they did the same thing everybody else does. How many people believe, how many people are on the fence, how many people think it's baloney. Okay. And it was always that 36%, 42%, 16, 17% thing. But they asked a couple of different questions, like Obama was running for president against the guy from Massachusetts. I can't remember his name.
Romney.
Romney,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And they also asked the question, who would you like to talk to to the aliens if they come here and all that? And the other question they asked was, have you seen a UFO? 16.74% of the people polled said they had. They gave me a number to work with, but it didn't work with any of the data that we had.
No, that would be a crazy huge number.
Yeah, it just didn't work. We had 167,000, and you're talking a huge number when you're looking at adult Americans. So we said, that can't be right. 2 years later, Gallup did it, September of 2019. They did a similar poll and asked that same question along with other stuff they asked, and it came up exactly the same amount.
16%?
16.74%. So we're saying, okay. So I went back to census records, pulled out the adult population for the United States, 18 plus, and cranked the number. Okay.
Wouldn't that be like 300K or more?
What do you mean?
Oh, wait, no. What? No, it'd be much bigger than that. Hold on.
43 million.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. 43 million. Now, that doesn't line up with 167,000.
Not at all. Not at all.
Right. And I tried it with the formula, trying, like everybody told me, the 1 in 10 report what they see, That's nice if you're talking to a college class that came to hear you speak. That's nice if the barber's asking all his clients and everything. But from a bigger scale, it doesn't work. I wasn't comfortable with the numbers. So what I did, I pulled census data for each individual state. And I worked the ratios based on the amount of sightings for each individual state.
Right.
Okay. And so it was as little as 1 in 150 people to 1 in 475 people. And the top of the bell curve was 1 in about 250 to 255.
Wow.
Okay. We had a lot of rainy afternoons playing with that. So where we've gone since then is I even took that 15,156 for 30 years, let's figure a generation, which is 32 years roughly. And I said, okay, we got this 60-year window here, 2 generations worth of data. Okay. 30 years is a generation. So we cranked it against that, and it came back. Remember I said that 1 in 257, this came out to 1 in 263. It's almost negligible.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. So coming from both ends, you got to roughly the same place.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that still means there's still a lot of people out there who probably haven't reported anything.
Right.
I tend to go, polling data is a very good metric. I mean, politics wouldn't be pouring money into it if it wasn't a good metric.
Right.
So that's what we work with. So that's kind of the big thing. And I still have a lot of people in the UFO community. Oh no, Cheryl, it's got to be more like 1 in 50, and the numbers don't support it.
No.
Now people for all these years have been saying to me, Cheryl, Cheryl, you poor dunce. It's population. Look at the big cities, sir. It's all clustered around the cities.
Right.
Okay. And if you plot dots on a map for your state, it's all clusters in the city, and you see the stuff scattered out through the woodlands, as they say. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But when people ask me anymore, where's the hot spot? And I say, please define what you think is a hot spot. Do you want the state? California is number 1. Florida is number 2. Texas is number 3.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you want it by county? Oh, Los Angeles County is the number 1 county in the country for sightings. They have more sightings than 39 individual states.
Wow.
Maricopa County, Arizona, Phoenix, has more sightings than 36 individual states. Okay.
Right.
That's a big deal.
Do these at all correlate with the population of that county?
Yes and no. Okay, yes and no. Here's what we learned doing the book for between 2015 and 2017 when we published our first book, and coming into 2020, we all the time in the world, no place to go. Remember? Okay. So I played with it, and we found out we had a curve. I started plotting it by hour, whole hours. Okay. And it was this little line from 1 o'clock in the morning, a little bump at 5. And basically from midnight down to about 4 o'clock in the afternoon represented 25% of the sightings in a single day. Mm-hmm. Between 5 o'clock at night and 11:30 at night represented 68 to 75% of the sightings. So it's this big peak over here, with the bulk of it happening between 8:30 and 10:30, bedtime hours. So what did that tell us? Without even looking at a graph, that told us bedtime hours, taking the dog for a walk, going out for that last smoke, standing out on the back deck, having a smoke and a drink with your wife or somebody else. It was all that stuff, leisure time activity and hours of darkness. And we had to prove both of them separately. All right. So an example, if you go to Alaska, their summertime period, every place else, the numbers are big, right? In the summertime, Alaska, they're in the toilet. Why? It's light all the time.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you ask about the population. All right. If I showed you a graph of the zip codes, and I've got resolution down to the zip code these days. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if I show you a map of like Cuyahoga County here in Cleveland, Ohio. Okay. If you look at downtown Cleveland, oh yeah, they got 20, let's say 25 sightings over a period of 20 years, okay, wow, that sounds like a lot. It looks dense all through the hours of the day, okay? Then you move out to the zip codes that are the suburbs, the bedroom communities, the unincorporated little communities further out, and the rural villages. That's where all the sightings are, down this column, 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night, and the rest of it's all empty.
Also, wouldn't it make sense that the sightings are more out there because that's where it's darker? You get a better, more crisp.
Well, people argue that case to me with like LA. They come back and go, sure, they got the light pollution. They said LA, the city does, but LA County is a huge area.
Right.
And as soon as you get away from downtown, it gets dark out there. Mm-hmm. If you get up in the mountains above the city lights, it gets pretty dark. Okay. Mm-hmm. So yeah. But the other thing we found out is like these hours of the day thing were as much about human activity as they were about ET. Okay. Give you an example. If you look at Las Vegas, Clark County, Las Vegas is pretty high up there in the sightings. 1 o'clock in the morning, there's a spike. There's a spike at 3 o'clock and one at 4 o'clock. And I sent this chart out to an investigator out there and said, do you have any wisdom to this? He says, yeah, that's when the clubs and the casinos let out.
That's just what I was going to say, something to do with
that. They're letting out, getting in their car. Hey, honey, look at that. Same thing. We were looking at days of the week. Saturday, mostly Saturday night. Okay. Saturday, Sunday to some degree, Friday to some degree. Now, there were southern states, it was Wednesday or Thursday. Linda's got a couple of college interns working for her at the college she retired from. Okay. And they said, they're from down south. They said, well, down south, well, I mean, these states here, well, that's Bible study night downtown. So you got to be outside. You're coming out of Bible study. Hey, honey, look at that. Okay. So the drivers are population, temperate weather. Northern states have a quiescent amount of sightings all year long. Those are dog walkers and smokers. And then July and August go through the rough. If you're New England or northern states like New York State across the Great Lakes going across. Move down like Virginia, Maryland, it starts coming down and those other levels come up. Okay, warmer temperate climate. Get down in the deep south, it's statistically flat. Getting the very deep south, like southern Texas and Florida, it actually dips in the summer because it's too hot to be outside.
Wow.
Okay? So temperate weather, okay, drivers, population, temperate weather, leisure time, hours of darkness, and observer access to broadband. I was on a radio show one night, and I had the white book laying in my lap. We're on commercial break. And I had actually looked at the map we had done with census maps. Okay. And I hadn't actually looked at them. I was making them real quick for Linda, and she was building them into the book. Right. And I was laying there looking at it, and all the states that touched the Great Lakes had sightings in the many thousands. Moved 2 states away, it was in the low hundreds. We went and looked at those states. They were mostly rural and farming states in most cases. And there's a problem. We have a problem in this country with not having enough rural broadband to support the agricultural, the mining industries, all the things that are done outside of urban areas. So that's a big deal.
And then, Cheryl, I have to, sorry to jump in, but it sounds like you have a statistical analysis of people's behavior, of people's leisure time. Is that saying that this stuff just happens all the time? It's only when we can pay attention?
I tell people it's just like regular traffic. They're up there.
Just constant.
There are tons of it. Let me give you the influence.